Okay, if board members could come and return to the table so we can get started on the caring culture portion of the work today. Okay, I think we have a quorum now at the table, so we can get started. So what I've asked, this is the caring culture presentation that was presented to the board. So I'm not going to ask Ms. Johnson to re-present the presentation that was already presented to the board, but a number of board members had questions that were given to her directly or by email. So what I've thought that would be a good way to segue into this work session is to have Ms. Johnson review those so that we can get into our discussion and questions that we might have for her on this section.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. I'd like to start. We have representatives from everybody that helped put this report together. I want to say that I neglected to give a shout out and a thank you to ORC for all of their work. They've really been a great partner in structuring all of the goal reports and gathering the necessary data that we need. So thank you to Leedy and her group. I'm going to start with have everybody introduce themselves and just share their position.
Kathleen Waltz, Executive Director, Office of Professional Learning and Family Engagement.
Hi, I'm Maria Perrone, Acting Director of Food and Nutrition Services.
Hi, I'm Camille Bardis, Wellness Specialist, Office of Benefit Services.
Mary Ann Panarelli, Director, Intervention and Prevention Services.
Liz Payne, Instructional Services, Health and Physical Education Coordinator.
All right, so with that, I'm going to do the best I can to go through the questions that were sent to us. You'll notice first that Dr. Baylor sent around, gave everybody 3 to Succeed cards. I talked a lot about that in my presentation the other night. And as she pointed out, if everybody contributed to supporting kids and building relationships with kids from the community, the parents, and the school, that we wouldn't need a social emotional learning program or discipline because all of our problems would be taken care of. Is that correct, Dr. Baylor? So wonderful, thank you. So I'll start with the first question that was sent to us, and it was related to social emotional curriculum. There's a question about, are there national associations providing guidelines on implementing MTSS social emotional learning supports, and really how the social emotional curriculum is created. So the social emotional learning programs provide intentional structures and lessons to help kids and adults learn and understand and manage their emotions, set goals, show empathy, establish positive relationships, and make responsible decisions. One of the organizations that we are working as closely as possible with, but also using their standards, is the Collaborative, we call it CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning. And this is a national organization that's created, and it's been in existence for about 20 years, and it was really formed to put together social emotional learning, research, bring district leaders together, and teachers to develop the core competencies for social emotional goals or standards. So while they don't develop particular goals, they do evaluate programs and research that might impact implementation. We're actually sending a team out in October to the CASEL conference because, again, and we'll be sending staff from different offices because, as we've learned, it takes, in order to implement a multi-tiered system of support, it really takes everybody and not just one office to support the program and support schools. We are hoping, as part of Dr. Duran mentioned in the equity plan, that if it's funded, and we have permission, we'd like to move forward with an RFP to consider a couple social emotional learning programs that are based on the CASEL standards. So we have been working, we've had a 5-year grant that focused on best practices for including emotional wellness and academic with the academic and the behavior systems of support. So through VDOE, we also join other states to develop a set of national best practices for implementation. So we've been doing a lot of work. We have quarterly meetings also with the state as part of the Virginia tiered systems of support. So we work with a state coach who visits us and provides us with coaching, advice, recommendations, She's been a fantastic addition to our MTSS team. There was a question, moving on to the next question we received, that was about number of students that were, or number of schools that were still chronically absent. And that's information that's probably, I don't want to read the whole long list, but we can provide it in the next steps and definitely share with you the schools that, and I may need clarification, Sandy, I think this question came from you. We had some, I thought you wanted schools currently, or were you looking for schools in the past, like the data was from 17, 18? So any clarification you can provide would be great.
Well, I guess the most recent data that you
Okay.
have.
All right, 7. We'll get 18, 19 here soon, but we have the 17, 18 data we can provide. All right, so one of our questions was around raw data for discipline rates. Mr. Moon, I believe you had a question about the English language learner trends, and I'm going to ask Leedy if she can provide any information around that and speak to that. I think she may have more information.
We're actually still checking into exactly what the trends are. We're have uncovered that it is not the Hispanic students that is what's raising it. It looks like it's more the students with disabilities, but we will, who are also English learners. And we need to check into it a little bit more to give you a final answer to it.
There was also a question about why there was an increase in middle school discipline. And Leedy and Marianne both could weigh in here, but what was shared with me is that there was really nothing in the study that jumped out as to why the middle school is increasing. I think Dr. Osher did a pretty good job of talking about it a little bit. I learned today, I thought that was very informative about how our structure of middle school and our middle school students and their desire to start voicing their opinions more and having a little more freedom, and then the structures of our middle school. So I did think that he provided a little bit of insight to us about why middle school, why it's increasing in Fairfax County, though we don't understand that trend at this point. Marianne could share a little bit about we did select the middle schools, the middle school science teachers for the study that we're in with the University of California, and she can talk a little bit about that.
Well, just in terms of solutions or potential solutions. So Dr. Jason Akanafua is a researcher who has looked both at disproportionality and sort of teacher, looking at the teacher referrals and what can impact teacher referrals. And so this year we did enter into an agreement to have a study with our middle school science teachers, and they did 2 online modules that sort of, through a variety of questions and survey and thinking about getting additional information, try to shift impressions of why kids act the way they do. And we will have the results of that study will be coming in later this summer. So it looks at the change in the teachers' perceptions, but more importantly, it will look at the kids who have those teachers and look at grades and attendance and a variety of other markers. So, but that data won't get to the California researchers until after the year-end wrap-up is done. They'll get that, and then they'll get back to us with the results thus far. If the results look promising, Dr. Kunafoa says to us that he has funding to continue to work with us. So if we wanted to expand it to math teachers or we wanted to do something else, he can do that.
Okay, moving on, there was a question about assets. How do we talk to family, how do we assist students and families with understanding assets? So as Dr. Baylor shared a little bit about the 3 to Succeed program, and I talked about it in the presentation, we also have put out information on our social media, and we've provided information to schools about tweets and resources that they can use in order to support their school communities. We do have information that we would love for you to share through your newsletters, so we would like to send some information to you. That would be a link that you could share with your families as well. Again, there's so much research to support students that have 3 or more assets, and even greater if they have 6 or more assets, and how these protective factors really do help our students that not make risky decisions. So I think I'd address that one. Who takes the state climate survey and how many take it? I'm going to ask Leedy to share a little bit about the details.
So the state climate survey is provided to a variety of different high schools and middle schools. We have most of our high schools and middle schools who have participated, and they alternate from year to year. So one year a middle school will take it, and middle schools will take it, and the next year high schools will take it. It ranges in the number of students who actually participate. Some schools will only have about 40 or so students, but other schools will have many more than that participating. So it typically does end up sampling all of our middle schools in one year or all of our high schools in the next year. And then the number of students actually in schools will range depending on whether or not they are choosing to have a lot of our students participate or not. And this has changed over time because previously for some of the state climate surveys, we had negotiated with them a much smaller number of participants, but more recently that's been the pattern of who's been participating.
Thank you. So if I could just address briefly, I have answers to all the questions, and Mr. Wilson had asked me to share the answers. I will clean it up. I hadn't been prepared to send out the hard copies yet, but I'm happy to clean it up and send it out, and we can post it for everybody.
Yep. Thank you, Ms. Johnson. And if the question that is being brought up is your question and you want to have a quick follow-up with the person giving the answer, go ahead and jump in so that we can go ahead and wrap up that question.
Okay, so that one was mine. So on page 6, if you're able to go to slide 6, so this is the how students feel, because we don't have a parents feeling respected and included yet. So this is how students feel respected and included. And the metric is provided by the state. And this is kind of a little bit what I wanted to know is, we had, I guess that's saying 4,759 took it 2 years ago? Is that what I'm understanding? And then 6,600 took it this year?
So the average across the 2 years was 4,759 for the baseline. Yes, and we have an increasing number taking it now.
Wow, so very few took it the year before then, for that 4,700 to be the average. So I'm not sure how valid, to be perfectly honest, out of 188,500 students, I don't know how, 2,000 or so taking it 1 year and 6,000 taking it the next year, how if that's a statistically sufficient sample.
So let me clarify. It was actually around 4,000 each year. So it's not an average between the 6,000 and 2,000. The 4,759 is across 2 years, not counting the 17-18 number.
I'm sorry, if you have 6,600 1 year and the 2-year baseline is 4,700, doesn't the previous year have to be in the 2,000s in order to average 4,700?
The 17-18 data doesn't include, the baseline does not include 17-18 data. It's the prior 2 years.
And
Okay, well, we don't, again, that's not what, that chart doesn't show 3 years worth of performance. That shows, it looks like, the chart doesn't match the data. This is where I struggle. So it says baseline, what's the baseline? So the baseline is 14, 15, and 15, 16, 2 years lumped together as a baseline, and then comparing, I don't know. It's not a great representation for me, and I feel like we are better at we should be better at figuring out a device, and this is why I was bringing up in the earlier work session about not necessarily just dumping more questions into our 188 whatever question long youth survey that isn't necessarily taken that seriously, but a 360 review process, and every kid being able to, if we want to give them life skills and create, critical thinking, collaborative, communicating students, they're going to do that in college. Or they're going to do that as a part of a work environment, and beginning to help them understand how you provide feedback on how you are being educated not only would help our educators, it would help us in determining what's effective. and whether they're feeling, some state questions that some kids take, and 40 kids in one school and 1,000 kids in another school, now you sort of have, you don't even have an even dip, into our student population. So I would ask us, to really go back and take a look at this and rethink whether or not that tool, in the way that it's presented, actually gives us anything frankly meaningful. And if there isn't a more, on the ground way to touch base with our students. Sometimes I feel like, Benny sitting at the end of at the dais sometimes maybe gives me a better, reflective insight than that. So that was my feedback on that one.
Thank you. Carry on.
All right. The next question was, what does it mean to look at discipline through a culturally responsive lens? I'm going to share a little bit, and then if Kathleen or Nina Thomas want to weigh in, feel free. This means while there are the same discipline expectations and standards for all students, to intervene, we really need to look at a student based on what's behind the observable actions. And understanding, for example, if it's a lack of English proficiency that may be impacting the student's ability to understand directions, or is there confusion and anxiety or frustration for some other reason. This is really a lot that's coming from our cultural proficiency modules also, and looking at implicit and explicit biases. So I don't know if Kathleen, you want to weigh in there?
Yes, so then the professional development would involve working with staff to see the child as both a student and an individual, to help with the examination of assumptions and biases that might lead to stereotypes, misconceptions, and judgments that are often unwarranted, knowing the population and audience staff is serving, and viewing behavior with a culturally responsive lens is in direct alignment with the research that drives equity. Nina, do you want to add to that?
I just want to add the fact that when you think about good behavior, one person's lens for good behavior could be very different from another person's lens for good behavior, and you see that in classrooms all the time. You see teachers that can send a student to the office for very different reasons, and then you have other teachers that don't have students being sent to the office all the time. So understanding that your values have a lot to play in what you see as good behavior, and addressing those values and when it comes to bias and stereotypes as well. And understanding that it's a process. This is a process that we're all on, and even in my own process and journey with this, and I do the professional development all the time, I'm thinking about my own biases and the values that I have when I interact with my daughter's friends and their families. You know what I'm saying? So it's something that we have to continue talking about, and we have to allow our teachers time to process and have these conversations.
So this, again, was my question, and I think it's particularly interesting with regard to the slides, because there are some very significant differences that are obvious, patently obvious on this slide. And what we don't have up here, which would be very interesting, is boys and girls of each subgroup and the differences, because I will tell you that would be another patently obvious difference. But then the question becomes and I appreciate your definition of that. Okay, well, so does a teacher who has boys, are they more, forgiving of boy behavior than, a teacher who has either no students or girls? And is there a different lens of, is a fidgeting, blurting out, student disruptive in going to the office, or is that just brushed off from one teacher to the next? But that doesn't explain this. And that's where my question is, what other information don't we know? And that was what I was talking about on Thursday night, which is what's outside the lens of the classroom. the fact that Asian students predominantly come from two-parent households, almost to a T exclusively. In comparison to the others. And what factor does that have in the discipline of the student? And I don't think we're talking about things like that, of sort of introducing the what's beyond our control. That's the courageous conversation of going, look, you're going to have higher discipline statistics out of, these types of households, or out of highly mobile. The other thing we don't see here is military. And what kind of impact does mobility have on behavior? And whether you have a staff population that has been, acclimatized to a student that has moved a lot. So have you looked at incorporating some of the stuff that's outside the classroom into sort of the lens of looking at student behavior?
One of the questions on the family engagement survey was around school staff working with families on the very transitions you're referring to. So we have some data within the family engagement survey. However, it doesn't necessarily directly align with the behavior piece, but I think it's an interesting piece of data to look at in relation to this.
So what's going to happen with this data? Because okay, so now we have it, now what? Because turning good data, which I would say this is actually pretty good data, turning this, and how do you turn this into something that you can develop either teacher-led professional development on, or staff-driven professional development? Like, you may not want, this may not be something that you want to lead yourself on, professional development, but we're going to lead you on it. I mean, what happens with this information?
Right. So I see that happening with our school-based equity leads, taking this information and being able to have conversations with their principal and an equity team to provide even more significant professional development within a school around school-based data.
Okay, I don't love that answer. So the answer I was looking for was that the regions, and somebody said it earlier, I forget who, that the regions need a greater degree of involvement. And Mark Greenfelder's no longer here, but the work that Project Momentum is doing with revealing where we have problems. So for me, layering this information over the top of the performance at a particular school of a particular subgroup, and looking, okay, do you have, are you in the red zone for students with disabilities, for example, as an elementary school? Well, what does your absenteeism look like? What does your climate survey on the caring culture for the adults in the building look like? Like, do they have the capacity? Have we built the capacity? And then, what's your student? So if you have unhappy people in the building because they're not getting their PD, or they don't like their principal, or whatever, and you have absenteeism because the kids are always being punitively treated and they're being referred, guess what? Your students with disabilities data on testing and performance is going to be in the tank. And so it's the layering together of what is happening in the climate for the adults in the building, the climate for the kids in the building, and where do the two not necessarily match? And you see those referrals at, north of 20% over for students with disabilities, and you layer the performance. I think that's where we're going to wind up with understanding why we're in the red in some schools and certain subgroups on academic performance.
If I could just say, what you described is exactly what we are trying to set up, with making sure that the regions are working with the equity leads, with the folks from DSS to review the data, and then not only work with the schools, but also make sure that it's addressed in the school improvement plans.
That's great news. Dr. Ivey, thank you for letting us know.
Okay, Moving on to food insecurity, and we have some great information to share with you, and some of that will be in a link. There is a link that the county provides. They have a website that talks about food support. Marion's also found some great information recently, but the foods, I think the link will be interesting information for you because it shows a heat map about where our needs are in Fairfax County. So I will provide that in the information that we have.
So thank you very much. This was my question, and I will be very interested in seeing that. Unless it's already in there, what I would be interested in seeing as a next step is where the gaps are. Is that included in what you're going to give to us?
We do have some information. We have some information about where our needs are for food pantries.
Okay.
Additional food pantries. We know that snow days are a concern.
Right.
The county, Fairfax County, does have emergency food banks and supports for families. But again, that's not always easy to predict, especially when you get a snow day. Marianne actually found some great resources online that I think we need to consider with the county that we'll share with Mary Jo Davis back there, our coordinator for social work services, so that we can collaborate because there's some creative ideas.
That would be great. And, things like winter break, spring break, times in the summer. And I know we're doing a lot to fill those gaps. The breakfast and lunch program is marvelous. I think we do need to help get the word out. I'm going to send something out in my newsletter to let people know, yes, you can come here and your child will have a free meal and you don't have to prove anything. You just come and as an adult, I think it's $2 if you're an adult, you pay that, and it's a great lunch. So at some of my schools last year, there wasn't as much participation, and I'm not sure why, because there certainly are plenty of needy families and needy kids at these schools. So maybe they just hadn't gotten used to using them, or didn't believe it, or it just didn't get the word out. So whatever we can do to get the word around about these wonderful programs to fill these gaps, I think would be important too. Thank you.
Anyone, if you have a comment, if you want to get involved in the question that's being put forward, just go ahead and let the person who asked the question then go ahead and jump in.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. I will jump in. First off, thanks. The Summer Feeds is a great program, but also during the school year where we have the grab and goes for breakfast. Have we done any longitudinal studies between a decrease in discipline or referrals for behavior based on those schools in which we have more comprehensive food security supports?
Not to our knowledge, no.
It's my understanding there's a direct linkage between the two, and so it would be interesting to monitor and to better understand. The second question, and this follows up somewhat on some questions that Mr. McElveen sent around. I was surprised to learn a couple weeks ago that Mr. Taylor has not been in for a while, and so would like to better understand what the plans are for that department.
Currently, Mr. Taylor is on leave, and Maria Perrone was named the acting director back in, what month was it? September? Back in September when Mr. Taylor began to take leave. But because of HIPAA, I'm not able to discuss this any further.
You don't need to discuss it any further, although it would have been nice as a board member to know that there had been changes in the department on even a temporary basis. Thank you.
Okay, moving on. Can the public view the cultural training modules? Module 1 video is currently available to the public on our website. But the content of Module 2 and Module 3 do require facilitation and guidance throughout the learning. The content is actually tailored to fit the professional decisions and practices that FCPS employees navigate. Kathleen could probably speak to this, but we can certainly provide an outline of the themes and the goals of the modules in order to inform the community of what the common professional learning is being provided that provides equity.
Can you guys go to the slide that relates to the questions so that we're following?
Yeah, I think this was a question I had, because I wanted to understand what was in these cultural training modules. It was, to allow the board to dive in a little bit deeper so that we can understand. So.
Is this proprietary curriculum content that we're creating in-house, or is this COTS, like commercial off the shelf? Or?
We've created all of the modules ourselves, and Nina Thomas has led the charge on that. She can explain a little bit about what's contained in each of the modules for the board's understanding.
And we also are coming in September at the request of Ms. Corbett Sanders, that's in September, to show and showcase what are the professional development that's occurred thus far. But overwhelming, most of it is in-house, with one exception when we did have the Harvard University come and do some training. But other than that, the rest is developed.
Is there no off-the-shelf cultural responsive product?
There are several, and I'll let Nina talk about how they incorporate pieces of that, but the actual professional learning experience is like pieces of that and our own thinking, but maybe you can best describe that.
Right. It is based off the research from Terrell and Lindsay. The professional development is directly related to the cultural proficiency cohorts, which you all saw the video of our teachers last year. And we have pulled from those cohorts as well as the learning that we feel is a baseline for what teachers need in order to begin to have conversations around bias and what it leads to when it comes to equity and opportunity, access and opportunity with our students. But we have started with modules, one with that sense of awareness for what it is that we are even asking our teachers and all stakeholders within FCPS to know and understand when it comes to our diverse population that we have to serve, and then going into Module 2 and 3, taking a deeper dive into making connections to who our students are that we serve and our own sense of who we are. It starts with a reflective piece of who we are and our values and beliefs related to the work that we have to do.
So when I look at when we're discussing the school calendar, and we have all the pink days, and some are PD days and some are TW days, how much of the PD days in a calendar year gets devoted of teacher and employees' time to this?
We devoted a half day this year. That was it.
And is it a half day?
It was an hour and a half of professional development.
Is it one time, or do they have to do this annually?
It was one time, but we plan to continue the modules into next year so that we can continue to meet our goals of cultural proficiency.
All right.
You want me to do the last one, Teresa?
Sure.
K12 Insight. So the question was, how was K12 Insight selected? Is it a sole source contract? What is the total value of K12 Insight's current contracts with FCPS? So this is in reference to the Family Engagement Survey. The contract with K12 Insight is the result of an RFP that was issued in April of 2016. The contract expires June 30th, 2020, with 3 additional one-year options to renew. The contract allows for a menu of surveys, which include but are not limited to the Employee Engagement Survey at $117,000 each administration, and the Family Engagement Survey at $75,200 for each administration.
Okay, so is that $200,000 a year? Is that what I'm basically, 117 plus 75?
Approximately.
Okay, so roughly $200,000 a year. We awarded it in 2016. That's 3 years. So we're now at 600,000. When does that come, at what point does if with add-on contracts, does it eventually come to the board when you get to a cumulative total?
So first, the Family Engagement Survey and the Employee Engagement Survey are administered every other year. So next year, we would administer employee engagement, the following year, family engagement. And then I think Lee might be able to answer the other part of your question.
Okay, if we're going to do cultural responsive training for teachers every year, I think that we should do family engagement every year. I don't understand why we wouldn't want to. I mean, every third year, I mean, you have military families that are in and out. Or if you're doing it by grade, I don't know if you do the entire division every 3 years, but you could have somebody who has a graduating senior and that's going to be their last kid, and then you won't get any feedback from them. I mean, why not do it more often?
Would love to do it more often, but, you know, as we proposed the family engagement survey, it was an every other year kind of schedule. And we do administer the survey to every family within FCPS, so I think we sent out 180-some thousand surveys. And we'll have more time to talk in greater detail in July.
And then the last question I have is, do we have any employees who consult with K12?
I don't
Not that
know.
we're aware of, but maybe we can, Lee, do you know of that answer?
May I ask what you mean exactly by consulting, in terms of us asking them for advice, or in terms of them supporting other surveys?
No, employees being employed on the side as consultants for K12, which is, when I read their website, predominantly made up of former educators or educators.
I know of no active employees that are.
Do people have to disclose if they have consulting work with an outside firm that has a contract with us? They do? They do.
Yes, we ask that they disclose and that they have the permission of their immediate supervisor.
Just as long as somebody is tracking who has outside contracts with organizations that then contract back to us. In the past, that hasn't actually been, I don't think, the case, and I'm glad to know that somebody's watching that.
There was one other question, Mr. Wilson, but I think that we need some clarity from you because we understood it differently, each of us. It was about the data in the slides. We weren't sure if you were referring to the cultural proficiency or all of the data in the slides.
Yeah, I think the question I had was to see data broken down by schools, and that was really because it's division-wide, and so to see that, I think it goes to Ms. Evans' questions, like where is actually, where are we seeing greater, trends, and as opposed to aggregating it all together, maybe hides pockets of real problems. That was really where I was going with the question.
Okay. Some of it is available by school and by regions as well, and pyramids on the equity profile. And some of it's broken down, like the youth survey data it's aggregated differently. You've got gender and some ethnicity.
Yeah.
So we're looking at making some changes to the to have more disaggregated data.
Yeah, so in future presentations, I think it would be helpful for the board to see it in a little more granular form to see sort of what's happening.
Right.
Okay, so that's the final question. I have three people who are on my list. If you would like to get on the list, raise your hand and I'll add you. The first is Ms. Strauss.
Thank you. I have questions from 2 pages. On page 23, which is the attendance, and it shows improved attendance. This was a concern with the change in the state requirements. So can you elaborate on how we succeeded?
So this looked at 17-18 data and 17-18 actions. So in 17-18, we did a great deal with all of the schools around truancy and having we put into SIS that they, when the kid had missed 5 days, that there was a contact with the parent, a plan was developed to improve the kid's attendance. When the kid missed more than that, there was a meeting, and then the schools were tracking, and we had to actually report to the state that year. Did you have day 5 contact with the parent? Did you have a follow-up meeting if the kid continued to miss? The state was actually at that point saying, at day 10, did you take the kid to court? And if not, why not? We didn't think that was a very good question. And then the law got changed so that the law now says, rather than saying it's required to bring the kid to court at 10 days, it says that it's an action you may take. And it sort of stretched the whole process out so that you had time to actually intervene. But the 16-17 data was very focused on cleaning up our processes and making sure parents were contacted, et cetera, around that. It was the next year that chronic absenteeism went in as the requirement from the state. So in the fall, I guess, when you look at 17-18 data, you'll see slightly different. And then the last thing I would say is that on this metric, we use, if the school has 10% or more than 10% of the kids are chronically absent, that's higher than what the state requires in terms of giving you points. But it is closer to what the federal government will ultimately go to. So we felt it made sense to target our schools that had more than 10%.
So, so the state requirement is to contact parents if a child misses 5 or more?
The state requirement, that requirement is for unexcused absences only.
Okay.
As we did the next phases of intervention, we are now contacting parents when their child misses 10%. Like at the quarter, if your kids miss 10% of the school year, then we're contacting you just to say, they may have been sick, it may have been fine, but we need you to be aware that when your child misses 10% or more, there can be bad outcomes. And so how can we work with you to help address whatever the issue is? We're trying to get to kids who have like chronic asthma, that we can connect them possibly with the health department, or we can do things. So it is very collaborative sort of a conversation, although I know that some parents were concerned when they got letters from the school saying your child was absent because they were like, yeah, well, he was sick. I'm allowed to have him absent, but we're trying to get to all the reasons why kids may miss excused or unexcused because they're missing instruction.
And I guess going back to the if a child is ill, and I know it tends to be, I'm assuming it still tends to be younger children. I remember years ago, that was an issue, kindergarten, first and second grade, whether or not parents were keeping them
You sort of
home
have
more
a bimodal, so kindergarten, first grade, you have a lot of absences.
And then when they're
11th,
older.
12th grade, you have a lot of absences. The low point is around 7th, 8th grade. And it's sort of like, I think at its 7th and 8th grade, the parents now feel this is serious, and the kid isn't yet making the decisions. And so that's kind of your low point at this moment. We have to go back and look at that data again with the, new year, because that's a couple years old data, but as we've done more around this.
Good. And then the other page is on page 25, middle school and disruptive behavior, which we did get more insights in earlier today. It was interesting where we saw improvement, the elementary and the high school level. And is there any other insights you want to share on the middle school?
The middle school principals have shared that they feel that what they hear from their high school colleagues about the benefits of having a SOSA has really made a difference, because they can dig into the data and they can particularly intervene with kids who have multiple infractions, and just sort of watch for those kids who are tipping over to the point of having repeated infractions. Our suggestion was looking at data, and perhaps we could assign some additional SOSAs to middle schools who have high levels of suspension or other data.
I think it was 2 years ago, maybe last year, we had gotten concerns for elementary behavior, and it appears we've made progress in a positive way. What has happened there?
I think that if, again, you talk to elementary principals, you will still hear that they feel like the intensity and frequency is still climbing. I think the overall, again, this is for sort of the D behaviors, disruptive, disrespectful kinds of behaviors. And I think that just some of our work that we've been doing with people around understanding how kids behave. So you have both things going on. So what we've been reporting to you is that we're seeing this increase in sort of aggressive behaviors, which are probably getting coded differently than this, because they have resulted in assault on staff with injury or other significant sorts of things. So they're not necessarily being captured in this D category.
All right, I have Ms. McLaughlin, followed by Ms. Derenak-Kovacs.
So I was looking at, I think it's page 26 of the report, toward the bottom where it says data analysis and conclusions. And basically it was saying that when looking at chronic absenteeism, FCPS it gives two conclusions from the analysis. FCPS should continue to work with parents and the larger community to support understanding of the importance of regular school attendance. Number 2, alert parents and students to the possible negative impact of missing even a few days of school. I just take issue with that because I just don't really see this as a more substantive approach to the problem. I mean, I think everybody in this room knows that there are so many factors that will contribute to why a student's going to be absent. And what I would have wanted to see here was more of a wraparound services, holistic approach of FCPS is going to work with the school social workers and psychologists to identify what is the barrier that's impacting kids attending school. So that's just one example in this report. I also, at a macro level to my colleagues, so much of this is just, here's the division-wide data point. And a lot of them, we have 3 years as baseline, which seems sort of strange to me. I thought baseline means 1 year. And then everything after your baseline year is your next successive year. But there's times where it's saying baseline is 3 years worth of data, which I don't really understand that piece. And the other thing is that if we're not seeing movement, then this is the operational component for Dr. Brabrand and the team to come to us and say, we're not having any movement, so now we're going to try these additional steps, something that's a little deeper to it. So I guess I'm sort of struggling with this report. I do want to compliment with a very big glow. I feel that there's a lot of really good things that you are all doing as a division to try and move us toward achieving a caring culture. So I don't want to discount that piece of it. But I just found that the data pieces, it felt a little bit like it's an obligation that Scott or the superintendent feels he has to bring to the board. It's something we do every year. You guys have a lot of work on your plate, and this is sort of like, okay, let's just make sure we get this done. And for the board members, I will say, you guys look at these things, these metrics. I mean, sometimes we're talking about something like, I think it was that when we just looked at disruptive behavior referrals as a metric. So for elementary school students, the baseline was 1.5% of elementary school students have disruptive behavior referrals. I mean, that's something to celebrate. It's only 1.5%. But then what? Why don't we get a more meaningful metric when we're talking about, I'm hearing from our principals and our teachers that disruptive behavior is a problem to successful learning in the classroom. And it's a real challenge, and it's affecting teacher morale and the ability to be the most dynamic, engaged instructors they can be. So then why don't we just try and figure out what that is? Because I feel like this data almost doesn't even match what I'm hearing from the front lines about what they're struggling with. And maybe it's also trying to disaggregate it, that being a large school system of 200 schools, when you lump it all in there, I know you disaggregated by elementary to middle to high, but it doesn't really tell us that where are we having some of these challenges. Maybe some of our schools, the numbers are so low because we're having almost no disruptive behaviors. But maybe some of the other schools, it's not an average of 4% at the high school, it's double that. And as a board member, I feel it's harder for me to kind of, from a governing standpoint, tell you anything other than, oh, okay. Like I just, so the long and short of it is that I do want to compliment the dedication of what I think is being done. The report, I guess it's in its current form, more so I guess to my colleagues, because there's 12 of us. You all can decide whether you think this report serves you well, and if it does, then we vote in support of it, and that helps Dr. Brabrand. But I guess there's a part of me that's wanting to sort of say, I don't feel like this helps me as a board member from a governing body on saying, yes, we're making strides in these metrics. I don't want to send the wrong message to Scott and to the team. These metrics are great. This report looks good. This tells me what I need to do to say with confidence back to the community, hey, how are we doing on a caring culture? And I don't know the solution here tonight after a very long day for all of us, but I guess I'm more so hoping to generate some thinking on this because I'm definitely struggling with what I see. We've somehow communicated to Superintendent Braber what we want and need. And then Ms. Johnson, I very much appreciate that you have offered to give us the questions and the responses, only because I am a visual learner, and so I was trying to follow the questions that you were responding to board members from the prior Thursday night. And so that would be great when you have time. It's not a rush, but I would enjoy seeing that. And then I don't know if staff have any thoughts on what I just said.
Lady might be able to answer a little bit about the data piece. Before she does that, I do think that more and more we can frame this goal report around caring culture to some of what we were just talking about this morning in terms of how do we build in disproportionality as a monitoring piece and really disaggregating by school, but also by student. I mean, that data this morning, what I heard and the sentiment I felt from most of the board members was that that was very meaningful data and helpful. So how do we build some of those metrics into our metrics here? Currently, these are the metrics that have been established for this goal, but we also, as staff, feel that they're not as potentially meaningful for us even to give you viable feedback in terms of what we would like to do and see better for student success.
Yeah.
And so that, I think there maybe needs to be a marrying of the two, because the reports this morning were really, I thought, substantive, meaningful, fruitful in a way that helps us even provide you that analysis. You talked about data analysis and conclusions. So there is a balance I think needs to happen. But with that, I do want to let Leedy speak to how it was set up in terms of the data points, in terms of the 3-year and the baseline, if that was helpful or not.
So in terms of the baseline, in general, when we're setting up baselines, we try not to just use 1 year, because oftentimes if that is somehow an anomalous year and it's different from most other years, it would set a baseline that's hard to then work with. So we tend to try to use a 3-year baseline where we can average across the 3 years and have it be a more stable baseline. So that's the thinking behind the 3-year baseline. In some situations, in this report, as well as some of the other strategic plan reports, you'll see 1 and 2 year baselines, and we went to those only when we didn't have 3 years of data available with which to set those 3-year baselines. But the intent was really to hit a 3-year baseline for the stability of the baseline marker.
All right, thank you. Ms. Derenak, Kofax, followed by...
Mr. Wilson, I just wanted to make sure that there was a next step for staff to capture for us. My next step is going to be that the board be provided the estimated time of when we will revisit these metrics, because I don't want to go into another year with these metrics just rolling over if we feel that there's some other metrics that might be deeper and more meaningful.
All right, Ms. Derenak, Kofax, followed by Ms. Schultz.
Thank you, and thank you for this report. I have questions on the cultural responsiveness training. Where could I or any members of my board have access to, what it looks like or be invited to a program? Because I have heard on a limited basis, you hear what you hear, but this is from administrators and teachers, that there are some broad brush perspectives that don't take into account all the nuances. And I can't really speak to that about not knowing it, So I'm curious about that, and I don't have any, I don't want to share specific questions because I don't know what I don't know. I don't know what it looks like enough to understand if their perception is accurate or not.
So I think there are many opportunities for you to see the training in action. This up-and-coming school year, modules 4 and 5 will be facilitated in schools, and as well as the professional development, the cohorts that are going on. We would gladly invite you to see the cohorts, as well as the video that we have on our website that has captured the learning of our participants.
And I'll also share that, and Leedy can provide more details on this, but Orsi has been helping us after the end of each of these professional learning opportunities for staff, capturing their feedback on their effectiveness, whether they've been useful and helpful. And we haven't yet received that report ourselves, but we will be providing that to the board in our September meeting. That was part of our work session presentation to share with you what are the teachers and the staff's feelings about participating in this professional development, because we do hear different things. It's really great, it's not. So we didn't want it to be very subjective on our part either, or just who happened to stop us or who happened to email us. So Lady, if you want to give a little high-level overview of the analysis you're doing, that will be really qualitative and helpful for us to see how we can make sure, to your point, Ms. Derenak-Kovacs, that this is really effective and helpful for staff.
So the survey information that Dr. Duran is speaking about is part of our study of professional development in FCPS, and so we will be bringing you the full study that looks at how well we've organized ourselves and set up a system of professional development to support our organizational goals. And since cultural responsiveness is one of the key organizational goals that we've been aiming for over the last couple of years, we have been throughout this year asking all the participants in the various programs, including the ones that you see listed on this slide, about what they've learned from it. And then we're also going back to supervisors and asking them whether they're actually seeing the impact in behaviors and an organizational impact as well. We don't have all that data in yet or analyzed, but we will have that for you in the fall.
All right, thank you. So then for our next step, if I could just add, Ms. Malberg, to again, just resend us the link to where that is, but also to ensure that in the fall, when these modules come up, that we be invited, and we can do it if we like and if it fits our schedule, but just so we have a schedule of when they are, because I personally would like to kind of see what we have out there right now. I think I took it when I first got on the board, and I know that's changed significantly since then. So I'd like to be part of that to see. Thank you.
And we would also welcome the opportunity, if the board had the time, we would actually do a module with you. I mean, we do that at the leadership level at the superintendent's office so that we know what the staff are getting and we participate ourselves. So I know that's time, but we would love the opportunity to come and actually have the module with you all.
Thank you, Ms. Kovacs. I have Ms. Schultz, followed by Ms. Corbett-Sanders.
Okay, I have a couple slides that I have questions on. My overarching comment on, I'm going to go back to the 3-year baseline or 2-year baseline. That needs to be statistically relevant for us in any of these charts. I think you should show each year. So as opposed to rolling, I don't know that it's even statistically accurate to roll 2 or 3 years of data into a single data point and then compare the successive year. I think that's what Ms. McLaughlin was going for. If you go to slide 16, please. So this says over on the left that the data does not include vaping. Why?
So when the metric, again, remember 17-18 data. So when the metric was set up, we had tobacco use at about 12%. And so we chose at that point to include only those things that were alcohol and other drugs. So that's the information that's in here. It is our recommendation that we change this metric to include vaping, because since it was first selected, vaping has become a much larger problem, and we understand that the board wants to focus on that. That will be a sort of resetting of the baseline, if you will, but I think it needs to be done.
Now, it could be that this changes with the July 1st law change of this becoming a 21 and above. And the hope is that that reduces access. That's my thought. Okay, if you could go to slide 18, please. I'm surprised nobody else brought this up. This is, I think, one of the most devastating slides in this presentation in terms of the underlying message. And if you look at the left, the first bullet, students reporting low levels of stress. That means our students are stressed. And I'm going to go back to, I think it's necessary for us to do a 360 review. I'd like to do it at high school. Maybe middle school is appropriate. I don't know if that's appropriate or not. But I think we need to better understand. We had an excellent student representative this year who brought a lot of this up. I don't think that we have the level of assessments that are, this is another thing that I think school by school, teacher by teacher, region by region varies greatly, but the number of assessments, what a advanced learner means in terms of the amount of homework, whether our homework policy is followed at all. To this day, I still hear teachers who like, well, I teach a advanced level or I teach an IB level, there's going to be more homework. So more somehow equals better or more rigorous. There is a disconnect between volume and rigor. And I think the stress levels that are shown in our students in this metric are not good, and thus lead to other metrics that are shown throughout here. If we go from that to slide 25, speaking of other metrics, so disruptive behavior referrals, and I know my colleagues know I like to do back of the envelope. So over 50% of our students violating a discipline policy were in high school, a third were in middle school, 15% were in elementary school. 2.5% of our elementary students committed a discipline infraction, 12.3% of our middle school students, 15.2% of our high school students. Our own data shows that if they commit a discipline infraction, their GPA goes down because their attendance goes down. It's all correlated. So the shocker for me was that our drugs and alcohol from 2012 to 2018 are pretty flat. There was a dip actually in the middle, but we have less now than we had in 2012. Our other violations also down. The big problem that we see here, assaults are up 250%, disruptive behaviors are up 200%. That gets to the culture in the classroom and the wear and tear on teachers, and we don't know what to do, and now we're getting bits, and now we're talking about adding all of these people, but the question is, what's the underlying, this is, I keep trying to tie these issues together. What's the underlying issue that we're not really actually seeing drugs and alcohol referrals go up, but we're seeing, doubling of disruptive behavior and 250% increase in assaults. And I'll tell you, when they come to us in closed session and a kid has assaulted a teacher, it's a devastating situation. So what's the plan with this? Now we have the information, we have the understanding. What's being done other than saying we're going to go get a whole bunch more people? What is investigating as to the root causes of a student population that has grown significantly? Drugs and alcohol kind of flat, other violations kind of flat, but we have a problem in what's happening in the caring culture of a classroom. You can't learn if people are being assaulted or if there's constantly increasing disruptive behavior.
So just a couple pieces of information to add to the overall data thing. So this is SIS entries for disruptive behavior. Approximately 11% of kids who get referred for SIS entries get suspended. So not all of these kids got suspended. About 11% of them get suspended. So just in terms of equating this to kids out of the classroom or out of school at least, it is not a one-to-one correlation. The other thing is part of what you see at the elementary, middle, and high school level in terms of the percentage of kids is that I think we had an earlier conversation today about the fact that especially at the elementary level, many people don't enter in the disruptive behavior things unless there is a suspension, whereas at the high school level, they're pretty much putting it in all the time. So I'm not really sure that the differences that we see are quite as effective.
Do you have any understanding of the root cause of these changes?
So what we think, again, in talking to the people from the discipline study, is that, again, you are getting a higher number of kids who don't speak English as their first language, so they're anxious, confused, not sure. When they're little in particular, they respond, like think about your own kids. When they reach the point at which they can't tell you what they're doing, they explode, right? They have a temper tantrum because they don't have the words to just carefully explain it. That can go all the way up, though. You can be a high school student and not have the words. So that's part of it. Part of it is we have a higher number of kids who have experienced some form of trauma that experience can be triggered. So the teacher thinks that I'm just asking you to do a regular everyday thing, but the kid reads it as you're mad at me and responds in that way. So getting our teachers to have more understanding about
I would posit that it's technology-based.
I don't think that that is a totally wrong. I mean, I think that that is adding to it, certainly. And certainly we do know that for some kids, the trigger is telling them to get off the technology. Parents are experiencing that all over the place. But in terms of the level of response, that sort of ability to self-regulate and come back down again to a more manageable level, even though you're angry, is something that we're looking into. It is.
Well, I sent staff 2 articles, one in the Washington Post on the inadequacy of law protecting children from inappropriate content online, and Jay Matthews' article about, hey, get your kids to do their homework, and oh, by the way, it's on the screen, and then the message is, get your kids off the screen. So the conflicting messages, and I do think that this is an underlying problem that I think has to be explored. My last question is on slide 29. So this is about when we see revised policies on tobacco, drug, alcohol, blah, blah. We're talking about the EAP, the Employee Assistance Program. This is what this section is about? Because it's...
No, I think it's the whole section, the whole second half of it, if you will. So EAP is part of it, but that particular one...
No, I'm confused, because slide to the previous slide. So we're talking about the EAP here. No, just one slide back, slides 28. You're talking about the EAP. Now go forward one slide. So you're not talking about the EAP because you're talking about substance abuse. So this is overall both employees and students. So under the EAP, what's available for employees with regard to addiction, referrals for addiction?
They can call 24/7, and this includes employees and their household members. And it's a short term, so they're getting 4 free sessions face-to-face with the counselor. So if somebody has a severe addiction problem, this would not be they could start out there, and maybe after the first session or so, if it was determined that they had a long-term problem, they're going to get referred to their private insurance.
Okay, I'm so glad to have that overview, because why don't we do that for kids? That's the nexus that I'm drawing, is that we have an employee assistance program that allows at least 4 free intervention sessions and help for an employee or their family members who have an addiction problem, including vaping and juuling. And instead, for kids, we throw them into the discipline process. I'm just saying that's a very clear dichotomy between how we provide resources for our own employees and their families versus how we treat a child in the classroom who has an addiction to nicotine in vaping or other substances.
And again, I think that part of the ask around the SAPs is to be able to provide some of that at school for kids. Again, we have been searching for cessation programs. They don't exist for kids right now. Again, this whole vaping piece of it, and it is.
Well, we seem really good at developing proprietary content and curriculum. We love developing proprietary content and spending our time doing that instead of getting commercial off-the-shelf programs.
We're looking. That's why with the CYT that we talked about earlier is a commercial and it's free. So except the training for our people. So the CYT is the intended intervention for kids who are vaping, kids who are doing cannabis, kids who are doing other drugs.
We just need to have the mentality that we should be treating them like addicted individuals, which is what they are, instead of they're bad kids who we need to punish.
I totally agree.
Thank you, Ms. Schultz. Ms. Corbett-Sanders, if there's anyone else that hasn't spoken that wants to get on the list, if not, we'll go to go backs, beginning with Ms. McLaughlin.
Just one quick question. all of the data here is very helpful. What would be would be even more helpful is to have it disaggregated by region, and I'm wondering if there's any possibility of doing that.
We're all looking at Orsi.
I think for some of the metrics, it would be possible, and for others not, so we'd have to look through it carefully and figure out which ones can and can't be.
So if you could, as a next step, provide the board an analysis where possible of the data disaggregated by region.
Wasn't that my question in the previous session? I said disaggregated by region and school if possible?
Ms. Schultz, I've been asking for this for more than just the last session. This has been a repeated theme, especially when it comes to discipline data. A year ago, when we first started looking at disproportionality and discipline, we knew that there were certain regions that had more significant incidences than others, and we were supposed to have had targeted interventions. So it would be helpful to understand what the results of those targeted interventions were.
Okay, Ms. McLaughlin.
Yes, I wanted to go back because on page 16 of the report, when it was going back again to the question and the metric on drug-free youth, and so the metric was percentage students who report being drug and alcohol-free on the youth survey. Most board members and maybe people who follow this carefully know the youth survey, I believe, is administered in the 8th grade, 10th grade, and 12th grade. But for the public, for other school divisions who like to look to us and see what they can learn from our reports, I think we need to provide that clarity on the age range of this. And then to the disaggregating point, again, it's really hard for the board. And frankly, I would think it would be very hard for staff and Dr. Brabrand's leadership team to use this as a strategic goal monitoring report if it's not disaggregated, because what we don't know is everything looking fine for 8th graders, and then we're seeing a huge pop up at 10th grade or 12th grade. So this, to me, I wanted my colleagues also to see as another example of where we really need to try and disaggregate as much as possible for it to, peel back the onion, as they say, so you can really see what it's telling you, rather than that, we can check the box that we have a data point to show through there. So that would be my request. And then for the data analysis portion of this report, I tried to look through it and see, then I guess for actions, we talk about the health curriculum, they talk about the SAPs. There's a whole laundry list of really good things that are listed here, but it would be very helpful, I think, to either provide a hot link that sort of helps people to go find all of these different programs that we're doing as part of this intervention effort. And then ideally, as we build capacity for these reports, to say, do we know if which of these programs are showing success and which ones we might want to try something different. So I guess it goes again to, at a very high level, I think we're trying to go look at the right things, but then from the analysis piece, as a division, I think we need to continue to grow and figure out how to make these reports meaningful to staff more than anything, not just for the board. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, staff, for the presentation and for answering our questions and following up. So, Madam Clerk, if we could go to the next steps.
I just want to add that Mr. McElveen had sent questions, and he asked for them in writing, so we'll add that to the responses.
Okay, so the next step is Ms. Evans, identify the gaps in the food program. Ms. Evans? Well, she's away from the table, so let's go to number 2. Ms. McLaughlin, Does that capture? Board be provided estimate?
Actually, it looks like the board's going to do it. No, board to, be provided with estimated time of when we'll revisit these metrics for next year's report. Does that make sense, Dr. Duran?
That makes sense. I don't know if next year's reports, though it's intended to, I heard, be in the fall, so that would need to be sooner than later, but it makes sense, though, yes.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I think if it's being, it might not be, I mean, the fall is only a few months away at this
Exactly.
point, but I mean, just in terms
But it makes
of
sense, the concept, yeah,
expectations going
absolutely.
forward, yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. And the third is Ms. Derenak Kofax?
Yes,
That looks okay. Resend the board the link to cultural proficiency module and ensure that in the fall, when these modules come up, that the board is invited and maybe schedule a training for the board. Okay?
Very clear.
Ms. Schultz, yours is the next.
I'm not sure what that, I don't know what that is. Really, so instead of just getting rid of that one, really what I would like is, in the next report, the baseline reported data needs to be represented by year.
So what you're saying, if it's a 2 or 3 year baseline, that it's actually broken out by year?
Right, yeah, it should show the data by year so that we can see, is it a trend in the right direction, the wrong direction, but aggregating 3 years' worth of data and comparing the
I
current
understand. I
year.
just want to make sure that
Yeah.
we capture what you want. Okay, so the next one is Ms. Corbett Sanders.
That's fine.
Provide the board analysis of data disaggregated by region where possible. And then finally, Ms. McLaughlin, the last one up there.
Well, that wasn't my last one.
What's the last one up there?
Okay, so I had, right, I had asked that we would disaggregate the data on the drug-free youth by 8th, 10th, and 12th grades.
We haven't. We can do that, that's easy.
Yeah, we have that.
On drug-free youth.
She wants 8th, 10th, 12th.
You want all the grades that take it, right? Not just those? Because sixth
Well,
grade
if
also.
you do 6th grade too, then yes, I mean,
Yeah,
and
that's what I thought
sure,
you-
and it wasn't just to disaggregate the data, but also to identify the grade levels that are taking this.
Right, to
Yeah,
list.
so
that.
disaggregate and
You want it in the report. We
include.
got it. Okay.
Yes, in the report.
I had another one, I'm sorry. It was on the first slide. It was consider an alternate metric for the all students will feel respected and included at school, other than the VDOE climate survey. We told you to use this?
That was a board-approved metric in the strategic plan. All these
We were
were.
dumb for telling you to use
So I
that.
mean, I think that's, but I think that's part of Ms. McLaughlin's next step in terms of reviewing the metrics. I mean, that's one that should be included there.
Yeah, that's what, I mean, to me, it's one of the most glaring because it's not a tool that we control and we're not controlling how many students are taking it. And I
Right.
just don't know how relevant it is to actually, that's an important thing for us to understand. I don't know that this tool helps us understand it.
We agree.
Okay. If there are no objections to the next steps that are up there, we will conclude this work session with those next steps. Any objections? Hearing none, this meeting's adjourned.